Dr. No was a resounding success. Well, in any case, it was a success. It made $59 million worldwide back in 1962, which in today's currency translates to about $570 million, which granted is maybe considered an underperformer by Marvel movie and Top Gun standards nowadays, but come on, that's a lot of cheese. And anyway, Broccoli and Saltzman certainly felt the success was enough to warrant a sequel, which they greenlit and almost immediately put into production so it could be released the very next year. And so, here we go. It's From Russia with Love.
James, you're hurting me!
I'll do worse than that if you don't tell me. I'm doing this under orders I know. And what are they?
Even if you kill me, I can say nothing.
You're trapped, Mr. Bond. You cannot escape.
From Russia with Love is the second James Bond film, though it is not based on the second James Bond novel, just as Dr. No wasn't based on the first novel. Point of fact, the filmmakers never really took the novel continuity into account when making these movies. They also rarely took the books themselves into account, apart from the premise and title. More on that momentarily. But anyway, From Russia with Love was chosen as the sequel to Dr. No, mainly because JFK had named it as one of his favorite novels of all time. JFK, in case you're unaware, was not only the President of the United States back in 1962, he was just in general a very popular global celebrity. He was a hip figure, one of the cool pop icons of the era, and you can have a debate as to whether or not this was merited or whatever, and maybe he was hooked on painkillers, and yes, he slept around on his equally famous wife, and there are rumors he was physically and psychologically abusive to her as well, and all of that may be true, but he's dead now, so it doesn't matter. They both are. So please, let's not start a petition to cancel JFK. But anyway, in 1962, when there was no social media, and all we had were gossip rags, letters to the editor, and the water cooler to talk about and pass judgment on irrelevant bullshit, John Fitzgerald Kennedy was a generally well-liked dude. Him saying From Russia with Love was one of his favorite books was the equivalent of like Barack Obama placing A Brief History of 7 Killings on his top reads of the year list on Twitter, or saying Atlanta is one of his favorite shows. It mattered. JFK was famously a James Bond fan. He had arranged to have Dr. No screened at the White House, so if he says From Russia with Love is one of his favorite novels, not just of the year it was published, not just of the series to which it belongs, no, novels of all time, well, you greenlight the fucking movie. That's just the way it goes. And what do you know, just in time, too, because it turned out to be the last movie JFK ever fucking saw in his life. He screened it at the White House on November 20th, 1963, just 2 days before that fateful little convertible car ride in Dallas. So now let's talk about the movie. It's a good movie. Many fans consider it one of the best James Bond movies. Some go as far as to call it absolutely the best. Sean Connery named it as his personal favorite. Some people even consider it one of the all-time great British films. And they compare it to the work of Hitchcock. And to those people I say, settle down. It's definitely a good movie, don't get me wrong. It's a considerably better movie, in fact, than Dr. No. It has better pacing, a cooler texture, more interesting characters and incidents. Terrence Young once again fails to give it much in the way of style, but it is nonetheless an efficient thriller that has been directed with confidence. I guess all I'm saying is, however much you may want to compare it to serious spy thrillers of the era, you have to keep in mind that this film still has a villain with a Eurotrash accent whose face we never see and who spends all his time stroking a white Angora cat. You know what I mean? This is comic book stuff, and that's perfectly fine, because that's what this movie is. That's what it's supposed to be. That's what it wants to be. The novel was more of a straightforward Cold War spy thriller about James Bond versus the Russians, British intelligence versus SMERSH. But although SMERSH is mentioned in the movie, and we are to understand it is something that exists, the screenwriters have invented a new villainous organization called Spectre. Presumably this was done to avoid ruffling any political feathers in the real world, and I suppose so the film could play in that big cinema in the Red Square and nobody would care, or fuck knows. I really don't know if American or British films even played in Russian cinemas during the height of the Cold War. Maybe they did. But I mean, in Dr. No, the villain's big plan involved sabotaging the launch of a rocket from Cape Canaveral, presumably an act that would aid the Russians in the space race. So I think most people watching this movie just assumed the bad guys were Russians or in some way related to the Russians. So does it really matter if they change the name of the villainous organization to some bullshit comic book acronym? Particularly if you're still claiming the existence of the actual Russian agency you've created a pastiche of? What's the point? But I digress. Anyway, this movie is a true sequel in the sense that the plot seems to be set in motion particularly because of the events of Dr. No. You see, it seems Spectre is kind of pissed at James Bond for causing their beloved Dr. No to be boiled alive in his underground lab in Jamaica, so they would like very much to kill James Bond. But before they kill him, why not also use him to procure for them some top-secret spy device MacGuffin? Like, let's set him up to do that and then kill him. And let's set him up to do that by having a beautiful Russian operative who actually believes she is working for SMERSH seduce him and have him steal the device and then set him up to be killed. But British intelligence gets wind that this is what Spectre is planning, so they decide to send Bond off to steal the device for them instead, and sure, why not? Go ahead and get seduced by the Russian spy who claims she wants to defect, even though you know she's just trying to set you up, because wouldn't it be fun to get laid while completing your mission, Mr. Bond? And so it is. Yes, that pile of nonsense is the plot of this supposedly gritty and straightforward realistic spy thriller that for some people ranks with the best of Hitchcock. But again, I want to emphasize that this is a good movie, and I also want to emphasize that it is a good James Bond movie. I said earlier on that the screenwriters took some liberties, and it's true that they did. The invention of Spectre, the introduction of Blofeld, but to be perfectly honest, and even though, no, this still doesn't quite count as a spy thriller you can take absolutely seriously as a realistic piece of adventure fiction that is taking place in a believable political world, it is nonetheless a pretty stripped-down thriller, even when placed in comparison with the previous entry, because most of the action here involves cloak and dagger intrigue and things ultimately build to scenes of personal conflict in tight quarters that play out in a manner that feels true to life. Silly though it may be, it is still just a story about one espionage agency trying to outwit another. There's no end-of-the-world stakes here, not yet. There's no big villain with his secret base and his elaborate plan or any of that. But this still feels more like a traditional James Bond movie, I guess, because some of the staples are introduced. Desmond Llewellyn makes his debut as Q. I think he has an actual name in this movie, and no, I'm not going to bother looking it up. The point is, he's Q. No, not that Q. I mean, Jesus, can you imagine? But anyway, he's the quartermaster, and he's the guy who shows up to give James Bond his special weapons or devices or whatever, and this will continue to be the case for about the next 45 years or so until Desmond Llewellyn dies at the age of like 130. Not of natural causes, amazingly enough, and is replaced by John Cleese, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll discuss that when the time comes. Anyway, Q shows up at M's office to give James Bond the first quote-unquote special weapon of the series, and that is, drumroll please, a fucking briefcase. Yes, sorry, that's all it is. Okay, not really, it's basically just an ordinary-looking square briefcase, but it has enough space to store a sniper rifle that folds in two or something, and there's a hidden blade on it, and apart from that, you can rig it with tear gas or something in case someone tries to open it. So there's like a special way to open it that only Bond knows, and anyone else who tries to open it would get a face full of tear gas. And I'm like, what's the point? If the only thing that's in the briefcase is a sniper rifle, why would an enemy operative want to open it? Oh, right, I forgot about the 50 gold coins that are in there. Maybe the enemy operative is hard up for cash and wants to open it to steal that or something, but it still feels kind of silly. Like, why have a rigged briefcase where the only things of value are presumably for Bond's personal use? Later in the film, Bond must go through a whole rigmarole of a contrived conversation just to basically force Robert Shaw to open the briefcase. He has to, bring up that he has a briefcase in the first place, and then he has to point out that there are 50 gold coins in the briefcase that might be of interest to Robert Shaw. And even then, Robert Shaw is like, Okay, that sounds interesting. Show me. So Bond has to open the briefcase himself anyway, using the special technique to show him the coins are in there, and then he puts the coins back in and closes the briefcase again like an asshole, tosses it over to Robert Shaw, and he's like, "Now you open it if you want those gold coins, you Irish bastard." He doesn't actually say that. It might have been too salty a line of dialogue for the film's M rating of 1963. I'm paraphrasing. But basically what I'm saying is, for all that trouble, it seems like it would probably be easier to just beat Robert Shaw to death with the fucking briefcase. The scene I've described takes place on the Orient Express, a train that Sean Connery would be riding again 11 years later in Sidney Lumet's famous adaptation of the classic Agatha Christie story. But anyway, it's a famous scene because it has a relatively extended fight between Sean Connery and Robert Shaw, which at the time was considered probably the best fight scene ever filmed. Certainly within Western cinema, and even as recently as the 2015 edition, the final one, of Leonard Maltin's Movie Guide, it is described as one of the longest and most exciting fight scenes ever staged. Okay, fine, I guess. I think the novelty is in the fact it takes place in a cramped sleeping car and Connery and Shaw throw each other against the wall a couple of times, and sure, it feels like a realistic depiction of two men in their 30s wearing uncomfortable suits and kicking the shit out of each other inside a sleeping car for a couple of minutes. But I kind of feel like if you emphasize that it's this quote-unquote amazing fight scene to kids that have already grown up watching The Matrix or whatever, they're gonna tell you to go fuck yourself. But it is an interesting scene, and more importantly, Robert Shaw plays an interesting villain. That's one of the real virtues of this movie. It has legitimately interesting and memorable characters. Something that, quite frankly, Dr. No did not. But here you have Robert Shaw in one of his early screen roles, looking like an old-fashioned beefcake. As in, he's fit as fuck, but you can't actually see his six-pack. But the character of Red Grant is the first of this series' memorable henchman assassins. And the other villain is Rosa Klebb, who carries a poisoned blade inside her shoe. And if the fight scene between Bond and Grant is one of the best ever staged, then the final confrontation between Bond and Klebb has to be one of the funniest. And the interesting characters aren't just the villains. Pedro Armendáriz, a Mexican actor who was quite prominent back in the day, is very good in his role as a Turk. He looks the part. Okay, he's not actually Turkish, yes, I know. It's a British-American co-production released in 1963. Move on. Anyway, he plays Ali Kerim Bey, the head of the MI6 branch in Istanbul, and he makes a charismatic sidekick for Bond in the first half of the movie. Daniela Bianchi is this entry's Bond girl, and she's beautiful, of course, and her character has some intriguing layers in the sense that first, she's a bad girl pretending to be good, but then Bond slaps some sense into her.
Liar!
And she realizes she's been duped by Spectre, or maybe Bond is just so good at what he does.
I think it's absolutely right.
She genuinely falls in love with him, I don't know, but by the end of the movie, she is now a good girl pretending to be bad. And that's it, basically, a fast-paced adventure with good characters and a couple of memorable set pieces, or what would have amounted to set pieces in 1963. You've got the thing on the train I talked about already, and then the climactic action scene involves a slow-paced boat chase with Bond shooting at some oil drums, and there's a helicopter that gets blowed up but good, and so on and so forth. Oh, I almost forgot, this is the first Bond movie to have a theme song, except it plays at the end. We get the first of the stylized opening credit sequences, which in this pre-digital age was accomplished by projecting the credits onto sexy dancing ladies whose faces we can't see. But you don't hear the actual title song until the end. What's my opinion of the song? It's pretty good. Matt Monro has a nice crooner voice, though this is not my favorite song of his. My favorite Matt Monro recording is actually the Spanish version of Born Free.
Libre, igual que el viento, a veces pretendo.
But anyway, my final verdict on From Russia with Love, it's an entertaining and fast-paced spy thriller, even as it doesn't quite scale the cinematic heights its fans would have you believe. There's quite a bunch to like here. The template is still in development, sure, but they're already getting a handle on how these things are supposed to work. In any case, even as it took liberties with the source material, I'm sure Kennedy liked it just fine. Hey, I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please give me a like and subscribe to my channel and share the video. There's going to be some cool stuff coming to the channel, so you're going to want to keep track of it, and I hope you like all that stuff too. See ya.